So we are building an open source library, and open source libraries often have unit tests. Why? Because one, it helps prevent errors when we make changes to the code, and two, it hopefully makes the library feel more trustworthy to other developers that may want to use it. So today we'll be adding and automating unit tests for our open source library. I decided to use Mocha as a test framework because I see it in open source repos often, and I wanted to give it a try. This is a simple enough project, so it felt like the perfect opportunity to experiment with something new. GitHub Copilot really helped me out here. It sped up the process a lot, especially at the beginning. I did make sure to review each test carefully and ended up adding more manually as well. So after a little while, I ended up with 3 sets of tests. One to test the initializer, like the constructor and the default entry point, another to test the builder methods, and finally the most important one, the one that tests the scroll and print methods. The tests were running correctly, but one issue I noticed was that the output of my library was getting mixed up with Mocha's reported output. At first I thought that was not a big deal and decided to ignore it, but turns out that was just a side effect of a bigger issue, and I'll show you in a minute. But right now, let's jump to the automation part. We are going to configure a new GitHub workflow. This workflow will automatically run our tests before allowing us to merge a new change to the main branch. Remember the issue I mentioned earlier with the output of my library being mixed up with Mocha's logs? I noticed another more complicated issue when I tried to run these tests with GitHub workflows. The tests failed even though they work perfectly on my machine. I did some research and learned that there are some limitations in the GitHub Actions shell that make methods like cursor2 unavailable. I figured there must be some other CLI tools that face these same issues, so I decided to see how they solved it. Take Aura, for example. Not sure if that's how you pronounce it, but it's that cute little spinner that you probably saw somewhere. If we take a look at the code, we can see that they use some of the same methods that we use to write and move across the terminal. But they have an option to replace the default stream. Which they use to mock a pass-through stream during tests. That way, their test cases run in a fake stream that doesn't interfere with the test framework. And their continuous integration workflow runs properly, so that seemed like a good place to start. I also saw the same strategy used on other CLI libraries, so I decided to go for it. This will solve both issues. My tests won't interfere with Mocha's output, and all required methods will always be available no matter where the test is executed. What's happening here is that my tests are expecting console log calls, but I just replaced console log with the stream write method, so I had to adjust my test to spy on that instead. But first I decided to create my fake stream. We are now spying on the write method, so that should fix the error we saw earlier. Now that the tests are passing locally, let's push the fix and see how the workflow is doing. And finally, our tests seem to run both locally and in our workflow. So here's a quick tip. Now that our tests actually work, we can get a status badge to brag about them, like this. This will let other people know your latest integration to the main branch was successful, so theoretically, the latest version should be without any major errors. And finally, our project has working unit tests. That kind of feels good. I'm so happy with the little green badge. Next week, we are going to document it and we are going to publish it. So it's going to become an actual NPM package. Until then, keep coding and have fun.